Okay, so anyway, what we talked about in that, no, oh, wait, we're live. I'm kidding. Uh, the Now, I want first welcome everybody to RPG College, which is what I run for a few different places. Like I've done it at the library. I've done it for Visioncon I did a panel last year on backstories. I do it at a game every year, and I have a special table for it. And what we do is we dissect role-playing games and try to help people learn some of the stuff in the background and how to be a DM, how to be a better player, and join the game. So what we're doing today is building encounters and talking about the challenge rating system in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
And so for
Now,
novices like myself, and I'm sure some people watching, whether it be in the live or later on YouTube and Facebook, what is an encounter? Like I understand what the word encounter means in a dictionary definition, but in D&D.
Excellent question. I actually was even going to cover that a little bit later, but I can always go right into that. An encounter in D&D, first off, there are 3 pillars of D&D, which is the combat part of the game, the exploration part of the game, and the interaction part of the game. And when we think of encounters, most people think of, especially in regards to the challenge rating system, the combat part of the game, when you're actually physically fighting with the monsters and the bandits and the cultists. We think of that as an encounter, but really all 3 pillars have encounters. Really for the purposes of thinking of them as encounters, anything that happens in the game is an encounter. But for purposes here, an encounter is anything that uses up the player's resources, because the more using up of resources you have, the harder the later encounters are going to become. So we kind of really base your encounters on resource management. It's a big Euro board game. No, it's nothing like a Euro board game. This is much more, but it is resource management. And by resources, I mean everything from hit points, the obvious resource, you run out of hit points, character dies.
Arguably the most important
to spell slots. Yeah, probably the most important resource, yeah. To spell slots and limited use daily abilities or magic items like potions. You only have so many potions and they generally don't refill themselves. It's nice if you get one that does. But you run out of potions and you don't have a healer in the party, you may be stuck with just the hit points you started with for the day. Then there's another thing in 4th and 5th editions. They had an additional resource. In 4th edition, it was called a healing surge. And in 5th edition, it's your hit dice, because during a short rest, you can spend those hit dice to heal a little bit. And it's based upon the hit point rolls that you make for your character. So you basically have hit dice based on the number of levels you have, and the die type is class you are. So like if you have 3 levels of fighter, you have 3 die 10 hit dice. But if you also have 2 levels of wizard, you've also got 2 die 6 hit dice. And during a short rest, you could spend like a die 10 and a die 6 to heal yourself up a little bit. So it's a resource. The cleric's channeling divinity ability, like the ability to raise their holy symbol and turn the undead away and destroy them, is a limited resource, because generally you only get 2 uses of your channel divinity per short rest. It's not quite as limited as things that are per long rest, but still it's a resource. And if you don't give them a chance to even rest for an hour between encounters, that means that second or third encounter of zombie overrun is a lot tougher than that first one. So resource management is really kind of where encounters mathematically come into the game. So an encounter, though, is anything that happens, whether you're talking to a little village waif who is begging for a piece of candy. That's technically an encounter. It's an interaction encounter. Probably not going to use up much resources. He was giving them a ration out of your character sheet. Actually, rations and ammo are hardly even counted as resources, because only have so much, and a lot of DMs don't even keep track of them,
Oh, wow.
you know, unless it's really important to the scenario. If it's important to the scenario, we keep track of them, but otherwise, most of the time we let esoterics like that fade into the background.
Sure, to make
You know,
focus on more relevant and important information. Yeah.
right, absolutely. So, and there are games where sometimes that's important. It's more of a like a survivalist game where you have to worry about getting your food every day or improvising arrows when you run out. Those are great games to have too. Every kind of game appeals to different players. So, you know, find the game that works for you, but those aren't what I talk about when I mean resources.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for clarifying for encounter. So please continue.
Okay, no problem. And I said I was actually planning on getting into that anyway. It's on my spreadsheet. But we're going to start off by explaining the challenge rating system and the assumptions behind it in 5th edition. Now, 5th edition uses a challenge rating system, which D&D didn't start challenge rating systems until 3rd edition. Before that, the whole concept of a balanced encounter wasn't really part of the game. Gary Gygax never worried about balancing his encounters. He sent first level characters against dragons and just said, too bad. And you learned to run away. And a lot of modern players don't realize that running away is still a viable option because there's so much focus on the balanced encounter nowadays. They don't realize that not every encounter you come across is meant to be defeated. Sometimes it's meant to be run away, lick your wounds, plan, build up some power, and come back like you would in like a major video game. You know, there's the boss. Uh-oh, didn't mean to enter here. Bye. Go gather 6 or 7 levels, grind, come back, then take on the boss. You know, those are still viable things because remember, video games came from games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
Dungeons and Dragons, and then Dungeons and Dragons is now borrowing a little bit back from video games. So it's a cycle. Now, the challenge rating system, though, does make certain basic assumptions about your characters so that the numbers add up because basically, you know, you look at the CR that's listed next to each monster, but know what that means. It's just a number on the stat block. First off, the CR on the stat block, the number is based on fighting a party of 3 to 5 PCs. So basically the generic party number, 3 to 5 with 4 being right there in the middle. So a CR1 monster is considered a challenge for an entire party of 3 to 5 people, not one per party member. In 4th edition, they actually made the CRs based per character. A little bit better in my opinion, because that way it was a little bit more fluid. You could have a party of 10 adventurers and quickly create the challenge for them based on the CR system. But CRs are really for the beginners to get started. But yeah, it's based on 3 to 5 PCs. And then there's a chart in the Dungeon Master's Guide that tells you multipliers to use if you have less than or more than the basic number of PCs. And I find those multipliers to be a little iffy. It really starts to break down in some cases, and as we go through here, some of what I teach you will tell you why that happens. The other assumption in the CR system is it assumes the characters are built using the point buy or standard array system for ability scores. If you use the dice rolled ability scores, you could have a character that has 318 starting, and then with racial modifiers has one of their ability scores already at the maximum without magical assistance of 20. That's going to be a heck of a lot different than the character that can have a maximum of a 17 in any one ability score starting out. You know, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a big difference between the +3 of a 17 that ability score will give them and the +5 that they're going to get at the maximum level. It only seems like a point or two, but since it's involved in so many calculations, and a D20 is basically a set of 5% results. 20 into 100 is 5.
Yeah.
So every point on the D20 is 5%. And then you're modifying it by a 5% plus or minus by your ability scores. And then you're modifying it by your proficiency modifiers. And every time you can get that one more tick on your modifier, you're making your character that much better able to hit. And so the assumptions for the CR system, looking at the various stats on the monster block, is that the characters are going to come up against were made with the more standardized point buy or standard array system, which all standard array is one way that the point buy could come out. It's a very even line set of statistics that you can put into your ability scores. It does not take into account, no matter what level you are, the challenge rating system does not take into account what magic items you quote unquote should have. In 4th edition, one of the things they did it wrong, in my opinion, and everything's opinion.
Sure, but I would argue that your opinion probably holds more weight than most of ours when it comes to D&D.
I've been playing longer, but it doesn't mean I do it any more right than anybody else.
Fair.
But in 4th edition, they actually built the magic item acquisition as an assumption, and the level increases. So it was baked into the math, which is great for keeping everything steady, but it's terrible for those people that expect that magic item they get to really show a difference. If you're now expect to have that at that level, it doesn't quite have the magic involved, and it free the dungeon master up to give different kinds of awards to different people at different times. So in 5th edition, they went back to taking the magic items out of the assumption of the math. And then if you have a good magic item, it can change those numbers around. But and luckily in 5th edition, they took the maximum plus of a magic item. It used to be 5. Now it's only 3. So it's not going to throw things off as much as it used to when you were dealing with items. But the assumption is that there's no items involved. So you can adjust your difficulty of your encounters based on the items your party has. It's also built with the initial assumption of using options out of the player handbook only. And that's because that's the only options that were available when they built the system. And every new book afterwards, the challenge ratings were kept on the same scale. The new books were tried to be on the same standard as the player handbooks, but there were, of course, some unforeseen synergies between different powers and abilities granted by the new options, which is going to happen. If you're going to make them any different, they're going to have different synergies, and some things are going to end up being even broken combinations. That's why there's so many power builds out there online if you go searching.
No matter what RPG you play, there's going to be broken things, here and there.
Any open-ended game, look at Magic the Gathering and how many first turn kill combinations that they came out with.
Oh yeah, like Storm and everything, broken mechanics like that.
Right. As you build onto the game later, they try to balance it to the older stuff, but they also want to put that new neat stuff in.
Sure. And
so they have to balance that from the neat, the rule of cool, the fun, with the how does it fit in the math.
Okay.
And in 3rd edition, this went crazy because they opened up the open gaming license and let anybody and everybody create for Dungeons and Dragons. So crazy with those deadly combinations, because you could have a book from like some little publisher that only produced this one book, but in it they've got a character that basically has it's a conversion of maybe Street Fighter, and somebody's got a Hirokin, major power, or it could be like Dragon Slave from Slayers has been put into a D&D game.
Sure.
You don't need a low-level character throwing Dragon Slave around. And I know we got some anime fans out there, so somebody knows Slayer.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Real quick before we go on, is these broken combinations that you mentioned, do they make the game less fun, or just like less fun for someone, be it not necessarily the players, but maybe the DM, or is it in the DM's power to maybe like just, since the DM kind of controls the game, he's just kind of like, you know what? Well, I'm going to throw a dragon at you. Boom, you're dead.
Yeah, see, that's one of the tricky things, and why I bring it up in the encounter building segment. It affects the play of the game. If you have of all power gamers at your table where everybody's taking advantage of these broken combinations in different ways, then the DM can just keep throwing bigger and bigger and bigger monsters. So your low-level party is going against, like a third-level party is going against challenge rating 10 and 15 monsters because they've got these broken combinations, and everybody's still having fun because they built towards that. But that one or two players off to the side who didn't know about the fact that this was going to be a power gaming game, or prefers to make their characters more story-based than all numbers and mathematics, those people are not going to have as much fun because the DM, to keep it challenging, is going to have to send more and more challenging monsters, and those low-level characters were going to feel like they don't contribute anything.
Well, just so I'm
clear,
just so I'm sure I'm clarifying with what you mean by the nomenclature of power players are like that. For instance, one time I've only played 2 campaigns my entire life and never to its completion. But at the beginning of one, it was just the only person I knew was the DM, and I was with a bunch of other players that were like seasoned veterans. But this was the first time I ever played the game, so I made my character, and the campaign started in like a little tavern. I had my little dinky sword, and with all these people, and so he introduces it, and the first thing all the other people do is kill all of the people in the bar, kill the barkeep, and loot everyone. And I was like, And so is that what you mean kind of by like power building? Is that they kind of just, all they focus on is leveling up so they can just kind of steamroll through the rest of the campaign?
Yeah, that's kind of some of what I mean, although that's not exactly power gamer as much as hack and slashers. Hack and slashers will go in and just kill random NPCs.
Yeah.
What happened here? Hold on.
Did we lose something?
No, I thought I'd lost the feed for a second, but I hear you now. So you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, there's a difference slightly between a power gamer and a hack and slasher. By power gamer, I mean they're the ones that go in and look for these broken combinations. They look.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Every extra point that they possibly can do in the game, and try to find powers that work together to be so much more than their parts. So they're the ones that are scouring through 80 different books in 3rd edition just to find that perfect combination to screw the DM, as they will say, because they think of the D&D game as an antagonistic game between you and the DM, and it really isn't. Yeah, it's a cooperative game. It's cooperative storytelling. Now, some people enjoy that type of game, including some DMs, and so if they get the right table together, fine, go at it. Wrong way to play D&D, but for the average run-of-the-mill playing group, especially with new people, you don't want to do that. You want to build your character more towards what you want to play. Do you want to play that quirky little fast-talking gnome that is always cracking jokes and stuff and isn't worried so much about how many extra 2 or 3 points of damage he can eke out of every one of his attacks? Fine, go ahead and play that guy, because that's the fun for you. And so you want to do the median level of fun. You want to find everybody getting some fun out of it, including the DM, because as you asked, does that screw anybody? It screws the new players. Power gaming can, because they'll feel ineffective compared to the ones that have optimized their character absolutely. And then it can screw the DM, because the DM might have built a story-driven game. He's built a game partly for the new players, or he's building it possibly even to publish, as a module. And so he wants the run-of-the-mill party to be able to go through this game. And then Hercules and Xena on your party, and they're going around beating everything. And it's just, no fun for the ones that aren't Hercules and Xena, and it's no fun for the DM because he's either having to adjust it on the fly to challenge those characters and potentially killing the weaker characters in the process, or he's not adjusting and they're cleaning it up. You know, an encounter that's supposed to take a medium level encounter is supposed to take to go through, but these maximized characters are beating it in one round. It gets to their turn, it's done. You know, and that's no fun. That is, and definitely if the DM's planned for a 4-hour session and you do all the stuff he planned for in 15 minutes of the game, he now has to improvise the whole rest of the session. So that's where you can screw people off. Yeah. So that's where, like you said, you got to know the assumption of the CR system. That doesn't mean you can't use the CR system with characters built out of Xanathar's guide and Volo's guide. You just have to realize that some of those options are going to skew the system. They're just like having a larger party will, or using rolled stats can. Each of those things will affect your actual relative power to the CR system, because the CR system made an assumption and you didn't build towards that assumption. And then there's one more assumption, and this is the one that gets most people. And it says so in the DMG, but it's in this small little area under building encounters, and people often forget it. It's that the assumption is that you're going to go through 6 to 8 encounters between long rests. And mostly by this, they mean 6 to 8 appreciable, they're medium to hard encounters. So they're going to use up anywhere from 20 to 75% of your resources. You know, they're not the negligible 10% or less use slot kind of encounters. They're assuming that 6 to 8 encounters in the day are going to be ones that use some real amount of your resources in the day. And so it's built along that line. And that's really what happened in 4th and 5th edition, when the action economy really came into being a big part of the game. In 4th edition specifically, there was a big thing that came in that you went in, you had your daily abilities, you had your encounter abilities, and you had your at-will abilities. And how that would equate to a 5th edition game is your daily ability is once per long rest ability. An encounter ability would be a once per short rest ability, and at-will is something you can do an infinite number of times. You just have to have the action slot to put it in. In 4th edition, a lot of people would come in to an encounter, blow all of their daily abilities all at once, nuke them, you know, do Dragon Slave just by combining everything they have. They made Dragon Slave, and then say, okay, we're done. Let's go rest now. Even though it's 8 o'clock in the morning in the game day, they're saying, let's go rest. Because they figure, blow everything, rest, because they get a full reset on a long rest. Forgetting that in 4th edition and in 5th edition, the rules actually do say, rules as written, that you can only get 1 8-hour rest in a 24-hour period. You can't just blow everything, rest. Sure. And a lot of games have time limits on them for something. If they've captured a bunch of peasants and they're going to sacrifice them in 2 days, you only have 2 days to get them back. You can't spend 4 weeks getting them back, because 2 days from now they're going to be dead. You know, or they're going to open this portal and let the big bad demon into the world 2 days from now, or the volcano is going to erupt in the end of today. You can't just rest whenever you want to, but people, and this was big part was a fault of the DMs, because the DMs weren't paying attention to that. The challenge rating system is not meant for you to come into every encounter with every resource available. It's meant for you to have to think every time you use a resource. Am I going to need to use this later on? Is this going to be a weak encounter that I could probably get away with without using it? Or is this a boss encounter?
Yeah, it's a risk reward system essentially.
It is definitely a risk reward system, and it's a game of attrition sometimes. You have to decide, is this the boss encounter? Oh wait, did the DM fool me and make me think this is a boss encounter? And now I have to go up against the boss, and I've already used my 8th level spell slot, and I don't have it anymore. And the monster we're going up against is immune to anything with a spell less than level 6. So now I've got that many less things I can do magic against it. So you have to realize that the challenge rating system also takes into account that you're getting those 6 to 8 encounters in a day. And now, when you're building encounters, you got to realize a medium level encounter, like I said, takes about 5 rounds to complete on average. Some will take 3, sometimes 8, but about 5 rounds is a reasonable encounter. A round is only 6 seconds for everybody to do everybody does all their turns, and that's 6 seconds of play. That means you spent 30 seconds on that encounter out of 16 hours of in-game time. You've spent 30 seconds. So it's not the juggernaut that a lot of people think to do encounter after encounter after encounter. It's just that it seems like it because you feel like you're going from an encounter, but you don't have to do that. Break them up with different types of encounters. Have the exploration in there, have the interaction in there, but make it make encounters that will make them possibly use up a resource. Like an exploration encounter where they have to use a spell that they would normally save for combat to help them safely climb a ledge. Do they climb the rope and risk falling and hurting themselves, or do they use that teleportation power to pop up to the top of the ledge, or that levitation power to float up to the top of the ledge, knowing that they're using up one of their spell slots, one of their resources? And you have to make those choices in there, because really the joy of a role-playing game is the unlimited choices that you're giving your players. When you're not railroading your players, you're giving them choices. You give them path A, path B, path C. They can go left, right, or forward, and they will decide to go down or up or diagonal.
What happens when, and you might be planning on addressing this later, but what happens when you give them, A, B, C, and they choose D? Like, for instance, I'll use my example I used a little earlier. Let's say you're this DM, you have this whole campaign planned out, you've been planning it for weeks, yes. And it comes time, and the quest giver is the tavern keeper, and then the first thing the party does is kill the tavern keeper. What do you do from there?
That happens a lot. Okay, first off, that goes into adventure building, not just encounter building and world building, because you build those story arcs and you build your campaign. And there's a couple of rules, and the rules are different for every DM and every campaign. So it's not rules as written. There's nothing written down that says you have to do it this way. But to some DMs, the biggest rule you want to teach them is don't overplan. Don't overplan, because they're going to put a wrench in your plans anyway. As Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, and I'm paraphrasing here, not the exact thing, sure. No engagement lasts past the first encounter. Okay. You can plan your battles all you want until you meet the enemy. Then it all goes up in the air. So you got to, plan for that. And that's hard, because it's not even one of the simplest, games that reflects war out there, but one of the most complex is chess. Mm-hmm. But still, each piece only can move in certain ways. Sure. In D&D, each piece can move any way they want. My girlfriend just popped up. D&D is more like reversey than chess. You can reverse the thing all the time.
It's not wrong.
Yeah, and it's more like, oh yeah, oh I know. Go and reversey and those kind of games are even more complex than chess. She's talking to me in the background.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a game out there called Munchkin that a lot of us have played. and it's based on role-playing games, but it's a card game. And one of the best things about that game is there's all kinds of ways you can throw these little hiccups into everybody else's turn by playing other cards. And that's what your players are going to do to your DM all the time. They're going to throw those hiccups in. So how do you deal with it was your question.
Yes.
As a DM, there's a couple of ways. One, you have a backup plan already there. That can work an extent, depends on how well you know your players. Sure. If you know your particular players, you can anticipate some of their moves because you've been running for them for 5 years or 18 sessions or whatever. So you can kind of guess, okay, this guy's going to haul off and probably kill my quest giver. Now what am I going to do? Well, first off, you got to teach your players that there's consequences to what they do. So some important clues might be lost because they killed the person that was going to give them a clue. You don't necessarily give them those clues. So now they're going to be working without certain bits of information that they normally would have. But you still want to give them the quest and try to aim them towards what you spent all that time preparing. So a lot of times you'll bring in a backup quest giver. You'll take an NPC they didn't kill and suddenly make him the quest giver. And he or she will have the ability to give that quest out because they killed the one that was supposed to give them the quest. Either that or you're going to have to improvise everything and throw your old notes out because they're not going on that quest.
Sure.
So, and that's an option too. Some DMs do the sandboxing thing. Generally, when I run a campaign for levels 1 to 3, maybe even all the way up to levels 1 to 5, I'm winging it. I don't even have notes. I'm taking notes while I'm DMing just so that I don't contradict myself later. Mm-hmm. But I've not planned a whole bunch ahead other than I've sketched out a few encounters, but they could go anywhere. It's when they come up to a spot that's appropriate, then I say, oh, look, you got that encounter, and we're doing it. But I haven't done a whole bunch of pre-planning because those first few levels, I'm learning those characters. I'm learning how they act, how they adapt. And any planning I do is practically useless before that because they're going to go the other way anyway. So I sandbox it a little bit.
And do you think that the ability to adapt to what the players do and kind of improvise from there is kind of what makes the difference between a good DM and a mad DM?
Makes a difference between a good DM and a great DM,
okay.
I would say. A bad DM is not the one. The bad DM railroads everybody. The bad DM is there just to tell his story, and he doesn't care about the player's story. He's technically there to facilitate everybody's fun, including his or hers. People forget that the DM is a player. He's there to facilitate everybody's enjoyment of the game. But the bad DM, in my opinion, and everything's an opinion, in my opinion, the bad DM is the person who is more focused on his enjoyment, his story. And he's not, the characters try to derail him and he forces them back in line and then does it in such a way that it's no fun for anybody. It's like building, engaging NPCs in that last panel. And I talked about what's the worst trait I'd ever seen in an NPC. He was the one that upstages all the characters. The DM brings in an NPC and just plays it like it's his character, and he's going in solo mode on World of Warcraft or something, yeah. And everybody else is just his tag-alongs. You know, and he's building for his own enjoyment. If you want to just write a story, go write a book. Writing a story and running D&D are very similar, but if you are not up for them throwing a wrench in your gears every once in a while, go write a book and leave out the other people because you want too much control of the story than what the game is there for. We're trying to make everybody have fun. And so that's a bad DM. But a good DM tries to be consistent. A good DM tries to plan for things and can roll with some of the punches. A great DM can improv on the fly an entire campaign from level 1 to 20. He may never need to have notes. Truly inspired DMs can come up with all of this off the top of their head all day long, or they can plan so well that they've got every eventuality covered, and they've got enough ways to put them back on track that they're never stumped. I mean, look at Chris Perkins or Matt Mercer when they were on the role Acquisitions Incorporated, Satine Phoenix running Sirens of the Realm. They've put a lot of contingencies in their game. Had a great talk with Satine Phoenix last year at Game, and we talked about this quite a bit. And Keith Baker was also there, who wrote the Eberron campaign setting, and he sat in on my DM roundtable panel.
Oh, wow.
That was great. Having Keith Baker in my roundtable panel was quite great, but he's a good friend of mine. I met him 6 years ago during 5th year of Game, and we've been pen pals and stuff ever since. But he's an amazing DM. I don't even play in his setting. His setting doesn't appeal to me, but him as a DM does. And you can tell he's a great DM because of the little tweaks and touches that he puts into his style of DMing and how he adapts to people throwing wrenches in the gears. That's what makes a great DM or a good DM, is their ability to do that back and forth between them and the players, so that the players never feel like they're being forced as square pegs into a round hole, and they feel like the story is an open-ended adventure, not a choose-your-own-adventure book with only 2 or 3 set choices everywhere.
And we'll have time for more off-topic questions from me, but continue with your panel on encounters, what people come here for.
Yeah, right. No problem. And that's basically the basic 5 assumptions behind the challenge rating system. So just to recap, it's based on a party of 3 to 5 PCs. It assumes the characters were built using just the point buy or standard array method. It does not take into account magic items. It is built with the initial assumption of just player handbook basic options, so no optimizing has been built into the assumption, and it's built with the assumption of 6 to 8 medium to hard encounters in a day. And I personally bring in about 13 and a half encounters in a game.
Doc?
Day. Little
Okay.
encounters that may use resources. You know, they're going to do that. Encounters in there, using up, like I said, 5 or 10% of your resources, or may not use any if they, depending on what choices they make. But I put those in there, and plus I'm remembering that a medium encounter is seconds, and then a ritual in the game takes 10 minutes. A short rest takes an hour. There's not a whole lot of time consumption going on. The rest is all filler time. And a lot of filler time, you can either hand wave it, but that's not a lot of fun. You can do it, I mean, because you want to go from action scene to action scene really to keep people interested. You want them doing something all the time. So you want to hand wave this stuff where they're not going to do a lot of stuff. But at the same time, for the realism and the immersion, sometimes you don't want to hand wave everything. It's like when I talked about the attrition games where you're going through and keeping track of ammunition and you're keeping track of food and stuff. Sometimes you want to have them do that because it makes it feel more real. It's them, subsume themselves into their characters more, and the verisimilitude of the game becomes more vital for them. And so the more you can fill their day with stuff to do, the more they feel like, well, they're doing stuff, the more they feel like they're making progress towards something, even if all they're doing is going to the merchant and buying stuff. If you can have them just go to the merchant and, okay, here's a list of what's available at the merchant, buy stuff. Or you can have them go to the merchant and interact with the merchant and haggle over things and talk to the merchant about the local area and maybe get a clue or something in the future upcoming adventure by getting it off of this merchant who's been around and seen a few things, which is going to make a better game day for you. I mean, sometimes, yeah, you just want to go in, buy stuff and leave. Sometimes go in and dig for information and network a little bit and haggle and see if you can use that persuasion skill that you've bumped up really high on your character. You want to see if you can use that persuasion skill or that charm person spell to maybe get a better than average deal out of the merchant just because you can. And so those kind of things are the fill-in encounters that people don't think of. So I try to fill my game with 13, 14, 15 encounters in a game day, but not all those encounters are necessarily combat. Just everyone has the potential to use up a resource or two, a limited resource, not an unlimited one. They all have a potential to use up an unlimited resource, but it's unlimited, so you don't worry so much about it. So that's the base assumptions of the CR system. So now, next, we're going to go into encounter building is an art more than it is a science. The CR system tries to put it down into numbers, but like I said, that's mainly for beginner DMs, just to give them something to eyeball to start building their first encounters. But it is an art form. Being a DM is an art form. It is not just a science. You can't. That's why, as good as we've got in AIs for video games, they can't simulate a true D&D game because they can't account for all the different wrenches that the characters could throw into the scenario. They can't give them unlimited choices, but in D&D we are giving them unlimited choices. DM has to have the art of it down, and there's several things you do to facilitate that. First off, you make sure your encounters should fit your scenario. So if your scenario is that the characters are out to sea fighting on a ship, there's probably not going to be a fire elemental attacking in that heavily water-drenched area, or a land shark. Is a regular shark, yes, but a boulet, a land shark is not going to show up because they burrow through the ground unless you're in extremely shallow waters, because among other things, they don't breathe water. But your encounters fit your scenario is one of the things that you need to remember to do. If you're just using random encounter tables all the time and just trying to roll yourself at a random adventure, you're going to sometimes get these encounters that just don't fit. You either have to scrap them and roll again, or make them fit somehow. And that could be interesting too. Why is there a fire elemental in the middle of the ocean attacking you on your ship? Okay. Oh, so there's an evil wizard invisibly floating next to the ship who summoned it. Ah, that's why he's there. That makes sense now. Now, the players don't always have to know the underlying reason that it fits your scenario, but you try to make things fit your scenario. And sometimes you throw that out the window just to have an oddball game, a game where nothing really makes sense. You're in chaos world. Loki is the person in charge right now, and everything doesn't have to make sense. You're in a cartoon, you're not in a D&D game, but that's okay. You're playing with kids. A lot of times you do exactly that. You lean on the cartoon rules. You know, in cartoon rules, you run off a cliff, you keep running and pedaling your legs for 15 seconds before you run through a wall, and there's a perfect imprint of your character running in the wall. In cartoon rules, well, cartoons still have a couple of rules there, though, and stuff. So make it fit what you're doing in your scenario. So that's the first thing about encounter building being an art. Is part of the art is making your, I guess, making your medium match your project. So if you're trying to do something like a Boris Vallejo print for the cover of a fantasy novel, you're probably going to be working on canvas with oils because he did oil paintings and stuff. So you fit your medium. Here, your medium is your encounters, is your brushes, and your scenario is the canvas. And you want to make sure that you're picking the right thing for your canvas. Obviously, you're not going to put watercolors on a highly water-soluble canvas. You know, You're not going to do. There's this art of painting where you use spray paint that you set on fire as you're painting with it, and it causes this melted metal type sheen to come on it. But you're not going to do that if your canvas that you're using it on is highly flammable. It's not going to work.
Yeah, no, quite the opposite effect.
Quite the opposite. You're not going to end up with an art piece. You're going to end up with a hole, and with burnt edges, which could end up quite artistic. Who knows? But it a lot of times it's more likely going into the trash. And we want this encounter to live and breathe and encourage your players to come back for the next session and the next session after that, and not get bored and stuff. So you got to remember to fit your scenarios and encounters together like puzzle pieces.
Sure.
It'd be perfect fit.
We did have a fan question that I wanted to bring up to you. Beth asked, what is your opinion on using the DM screen to getting people back on track? Moving things around behind the veil, try incredibly hard to put a focus on player agency, but keep relevant things happening in the world, whether or not the players are present. How do you feel about the DM screen?
The DM screen? Mm-hmm. Well, I use a DM screen partly because I like the artwork, and it does help hide any roles that I do in secret. But one of the things I do in my game is combat rolls I roll out in the open, so nobody can ever say that I'm cheating or breaking the game or fudging to keep them alive or to kill them, because I for one thing, I happen to roll a lot of 20s just naturally, and it's not my dice because I borrowed my players' dice and done the same thing. Sure. And these are dice the players can't get to roll above a 5. I'll borrow it in the very first roll, and they watch me do it. It's kind of a reverse Will Wheaton's curse. I can roll really high numbers when I'm the DM. When I'm a player, my dice hate me. They never want to roll in my favor. They just only want to roll when I'm a DM. So it's maybe not the reverse of the Will Wheaton curse. It's the Will Wheaton curse going to its final extension. Sure. But I do use a DM screen to kind of keep my notes and stuff separate, but I'm looking over the DM screen and I'm visible. DM screen, I've usually got my laptop because I want to have as few books and stuff as possible. I use Google Docs and Google Sheets to keep track of everything. So if I don't have to worry so much about forgetting my notes, and I can keep notes from one session to another because it auto updates on Google Docs. So I do things like that. I look up things on D&D Beyond constantly, but I can do that in the background. They don't even notice I'm looking stuff up because it's on my computer screen while I'm engaging them. And sometimes I tell them pause while I have to look something up if it's more intense. But I try to get them to be doing something while I'm doing. The screen can be a barrier, or it can be additive. Like a lot of DMs will put their turn orders on their DM screen on the other side. They'll list what everything's turn order is for a given encounter and put them there. So now the characters know to look at that turn order, gives them something to focus on the DM screen. Some DM screens, you get to build your own DM screens where you put your own charts that you want on the inside of the screen, but you can also put charts that you want the players to use often on the outside of the screen. So instead of them having to look up, because I hate having my players opening up any books at the table. I don't want them to open up books at the table. You're not, in my game, you're not allowed to do rules, challenges, and stuff during the game, unless it's a life or death situation. If you have a challenge to some call I make, you do have to remember that it's DM caveat, which means just because it's a rule, it's mentioned in the book, doesn't mean it's a rule to me, as long as I'm consistent. But number 2, I don't want to interrupt the flow of the game. So you got any concerns like that, unless it's life or death for that character, you bring it up to me after the game or between sessions. And that's when we'll have a discussion, and maybe I might overturn a rules call at that point and do some retconning with everybody's agreement. But I want the game to keep flowing, and so that's what I do. I keep the game flowing. That's how I prevent the DM screen and the DM kind of quarantine from affecting how I interact with my players. My players know that I'm always there. I am not answering my cell phone. I might have it on and for messages because there might be something important, but I'm not answering back unless it's important. You know, my players know that at the very beginning of one of my sessions during the week, I'm probably going to get a call real quick from my girlfriend, just so they know there's going to be a quick 5 or 10 minute break while I answer her, because she calls me when she gets off work. But other than that, if I get a phone call, I might answer it real quick, tell them I'm busy, and that's it. Or I might just immediately hang up and let it go to voicemail. But I don't let it interfere with my game. DM screen interfere with my game. Has that answered the question?
I believe it did.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there's any part of the question I didn't remember to answer.
That's all of it.
Okay. Now the next thing, and this is something that I touched on in the assumptions, is take into account your party's composition and style of play. Because of course the assumption in the CR system rarely matches the party, you have to match your encounter. Now, some people are going to say that's a little metagaming on the DM side, and yes, in a way it is, but the DM is the one that's supposed to be doing the metagaming to make sure everybody's having fun. In some people's games, that means fudging the dice rolls to keep the character, or fudging the dice rolls to keep it interesting. In other DMs games, it means just taking into account the party before you build the encounters. And you have to, there's a delicate balance there in that. Probably this is really where the art form comes in, because you do not want their choices to be made negligible, but you do not want their choices to totally derail your game at the same time. So if you're running a party of that has 2 or 3 really big tanks in the front, now we'll use the terminology from video games and from 4th edition for the roles of the characters, and tanks are the defenders in 4th edition. They soak up damage or can't be hit. They have really high armor classes, and when they do get hit, they've got a good stack of hit points that the hit may not really matter so much to them. They like to put themselves in the way of the other players getting hit. So if you got a party of tanks that are really hard to hit, you need to put in monsters that have abilities to hit those guys. You don't want everybody to hit them, because then they feel like, well, why did I buy the best armor in the game? Why did I build my character just to have the best tanky stats out there if still everything and its brother hits me? You don't want to do that, but you do want to occasionally put a monster in there that can hit them, whether it has a higher to hit number, has an ability to get advantage, which means it can roll 2 dice and take the higher roll, increasing its hit probability, or maybe it attacks some different thing than your armor class. Like a lot of spells attack where they have to make a saving throw against an ability score, and you want to mix in spells that attack all 6 different ability score saves. That way nobody who's built up their ability scores as high as possible is protected from everything. You always want to hit them with different kinds of things. Your tanks are also really susceptible to residual damage, things like attacks that if you hit their ally next to them, it also does it like 3 or 5 point the person next to them without having to roll an attack roll. You know, some kind of ability like that, overflow damage that automatically hits. Auto hit damage for characters that have really high armor classes, but you don't want to fill your whole dungeon with them. Finally, the other thing you do for tanks is use monsters with multiple attacks. The more attacks they can have, the more rolls they get to make, the more chance they have to roll high enough to hit him. And at the same time, that character is probably the most fun for the tank, because that doesn't make the tank feel like his armor was useless, because he's still being missed most of the time. He feels like he did a good investment in building up his army, whether he did it with abilities or equipment or whatever. He feels like he's getting value out of building his character as a tank, but still is feeling that danger, being overwhelmed, because they got enough attacks to get a few good ones through. They get that occasional crit, which always hits through. And if the only time you get hit most of the time is a crit, the few hits that get through are going to be more substantial because it's a crit. So build that. The other characters you might do, because the tank isn't the only one that you have to counterattack. If you're going into a obviously undead featured dungeon like Tomb of Annihilation, or something where or Curse of Strahd, where you know you're going to be up against lots and lots of undead, and you let the characters know what the scenario is, what adventure you're taking them through. And so characters decide to play paladins and clerics all the time. They've got lots of radiant damage, lots of things that work good against undead. That means that you have to plan to challenge those guys too, like have an obtuse undead that may be resistant to radiant damage, just to be different. Not every undead in the game is going to be that way, but your boss might be immune to radiant damage. So they'll have to use one of their other abilities against the boss, or the turn undeads gets used. Well, that's great if it's against a bunch of minion-y type low-level undeads. You can destroy them outright, but sprinkle in a few high-level undead that can't be turned at the level that your characters are going to probably encounter them at. Don't fill the whole thing with people immune to your turn undead ability, but sprinkle some in there. So tailor your adventure to the play style and position of your game. If you're playing with only 2 or 3 players, really low number of players, watch your action economy and don't overdo it. And that'll be another part of what I talk about later. But don't do a whole bunch, even minions. If you have a ton of minions going up against these 2 or 3 characters, they're going to win just by laws of averages. The monster's going to win if they got enough attacks. On the other hand, if you've got a party that's running with 10 players, you might want to use more and more weak monsters so they feel like they're all doing something and everybody can square off against somebody.
Sure. But
you still occasionally throw in that guy that can drop a fireball in the midst of the party and knock everybody down by half. It's not move, counter move all the time, but it's keeping in mind that you do want a couple of counters in there. You don't want one choice by the partners to totally disable your game. Like one of the recent games I ran, I sent my party up against a single monster that was a couple of CRs higher than the party, but he was a skeletal monster, which meant one of his weaknesses was bludgeoning weapons. They take double damage from all bludgeoning weapons. The party started off using bludgeoning weapons and immediately destroyed him really quickly, because I forgot to take into account that I had a couple of dwarves in the party who liked to use warhammers. Everybody was kind of more of a bludgeoning type of person, and so some of its other vulnerabilities and resistances never came into play, so he wasn't nearly as hard as he could have been. You do want to take those things into account when you're building your encounters. Because a monster who's got ability that never comes into play, that ability is not really being factored into their challenge for the party now, because they come into play. So you want to try to pick monsters that abilities will come into play in the game. It's okay if the party has some things to help counter those abilities, but at least they have to consciously have to try to use those countering abilities. Like a troll regenerates. But if the party uses nothing but fire and acid attacks all the time, the one thing that gets rid of the regeneration of the troll, that's never going to come into play because every attack is not healing him. But if, on the other hand, the party starts off attacking with other abilities, realize he's regenerating, and start experimenting with things until they find what stops the regeneration, then they feel more involved with the game, and there's more player agency. Even though you're planning around the player's abilities, they still feel like they're getting agency out of it. So don't cripple your players, but don't cripple yourself because of your players' choices either. And that's something I talked about, and before that when we were talking about how players can derail things and the whole power gaming thing. You know, don't let your characters' choices for their characters become skeleton keys to get through your whole dungeon easily, but also don't counter every one of their great choices and eliminate the whole value of them having choices in the first place. Now, number 3, this is really important. Do not set out to kill the party, but remember PCs can die. There's an old adage in Dungeons and Dragons, and it's misused all the time. And it is misused all the time. The adage goes, it's not the DM's job to kill the players or the characters. It's never their job to kill the players. That would make them serial killers. But it's not their job to kill the characters either. It is, however, and this is the part that gets left off, their job to present situations in which the PCs might die. Because it's that edge of your seat element, that drama moment when you think you might die, that makes living mean more to your players. If they feel like the DM is just always rescuing them and never making it to where a character can die, they feel like they're going through a video game in God mode, and after a while that gets boring.
Sure.
You want your character to have the potential to die. And some of the most talked about encounters that I've had from my players, the most excited enjoyment I've seen in the face of their eyes light up when they're retelling the story, is when they talk about when one of their favorite characters died at my table because it was an epic death, because they had built the character and they'd worked with the character and they'd gone through so many levels with the character, but they weren't just doing adventures that the character could never die at. Every step of the way, they knew that one wrong move and they could die. And even if it was a wrong move, a stupid decision, because those happen, even if it was a stupid decision that killed their character, they don't blame me for it. They realize that, wow, that was great. Hey, I pushed my luck one time too many and I died. That's what happens. And then they come in with another character and they're just as rearing to go to learn this guy. And that's what you want from your players. If you're a great DM, if you're the Matt Mercers and the Chris Perkins and the Satine Phoenixes out there who are making games good enough to be on streams online where people are going to just watch them like they're watching a drama TV show or a sitcom, people are only going to key into those things because they have those elements. And this is unscripted TV. Well, your D&D game is an unscripted D&D game because you can script your DM stuff all you want. You're not scripting your players.
Sure.
Yeah. And so you want to remember, do not set out to kill your party. Do set out to make deadly encounters possible. You can total party kill the party completely by accident, but you can even do it with that you meant to be deadly, because you one thing, and we do this in our metagames D&D league, as one of the rules is that if an encounter is going to potentially be deadly, a requirement is that we try to telegraph that point to our players 2 or 3 times before they get to the encounter. We try to make sure that they realize that this encounter they're going towards may be deadly, that there's no shame in running away, that there's no shame in trying to talk your way around an encounter instead of fight your way around an encounter. The people at the metagames, the other DMs, not just myself, people like Matt and Colby, Lucas, are really good about making adventures. Megan, she's fantastic. They do games where they are putting the characters in real danger, but they do try to make really bad danger comes about. They try to, one, telegraph it, and two, give an opening for the runaway. If the players don't make one themselves, the DM will try to make an exit strategy for them and try not to paint it with too much highlight, but
Sure.
try to point it out, because it's like I said it earlier in this panel, when you're playing a video game, sometimes you come up against the boss in an early like preview in cut scene, and you see the big boss, you fight him for a couple of rounds, then the boss leaves to come fight you back another day because he was just going there to test you. You didn't hurt him at all. He's not running in fear. He's just leaves because he's played with you for a little while. He showed you that you're little pissants to his mighty power, and then he's left. Well, now the players say, okay, we need to back out of some of these encounters, go grind a little bit, gain some levels, gain some new abilities, because that's what you do in a video game. You tend to grind a lot, right? I mean, how many times have you gone through one of the Final Fantasies, get to one of the kind of boss battles, and they keep wiping the floor with you, so you have to go back, grind, get a couple levels, maybe unlock one more summons, then go back.
I put on music and I just grind for hours.
Music, exactly. That's the whole point of a lot of video games, is you get to the boss a little bit too early because you rushed it, and you realize, oh shit, I'm dying every time I'm going back to my save point, or I'm running at the last possible second if you can, and you're just like, you know what, before I fight this boss again, I'm gonna go grind a little bit.
Yeah, gotta be prepared.
gotta go try to open up that one more summons, maybe take that one side quest that I skipped and unlock a summons or get an item that's going to make me a little bit better off. Then I'll come back and beat the boss. But until then, I can't beat him, or I'm very unlikely to beat him. But that still makes for a great game.
Sure.
Those prequel sequences, when the boss comes and toys with you for a little bit, just makes you that much more invested in defeating him at the end. It pissed you off. He came in and showed you were nothing, so you went and made yourself more than nothing, and you want to show him now he's nothing.
Heck yeah.
Even if you get down to 1 or 2 hit points, once you defeat him, he's nothing because you won and he lost. And so that's the drama. That's the edge of the seat that the players are looking for. That's the adrenaline rush of a mental game. I mean, you go out and play a sport, I'll play a sport. I won't watch a sport because to me that's boring. But I'll play a sport because I'm going to get the adrenaline of playing. I want to win. I'm not in this everybody wins kind of thing for sports. I think if you go out to sports, you should be playing to win. Fair, sportsmanlike, but play to win. And you go in, I can't even healthily do that anymore. But you go out to sport and you're getting that adrenaline rush when you're challenging yourself against another human being or whatever, or an animal. If you say you're freaking a Bronco buster, you're challenging yourself against an animal. But you're taking on the challenge and you're getting that adrenaline rush. That's part of what you're going for. Well, in a purely intellectual game like Dungeons and Dragons or Gamma World or any of the other role-playing games out there, you're doing this all in the mental arena. And so you need to have those edge of your seat moments to get the adrenaline kicking in. You want to be so invested in your character that when your character's about to die, your heart starts to race a little bit and you start to get into panic mode, or you get that laser focus that a really good athlete might get. And you start thinking even clearer, like, some of your chess masters will do, and come from behind and snatch that victory from the jaws of defeat. And so you want to put in those death moments, and you celebrate death. It's one of the great things, and I think it was illustrated really well by Matt Mercer in Critical Role. Without going into any spoilers for people who have not watched it, they did have a character death in the second campaign. I'm not going to say who for those who haven't watched it, but they then took some time in the game to honor that character's death. They did the whole remembrance and everything. They role played it. This was a session where they weren't necessarily going out and doing a whole lot of combat and doing a lot of the action stuff that people tune in for. This is the moment when they were, mourning the loss of a friend and an ally and a companion. And you need to plan for that too. If you do kill one or two members of the party, it's a good idea that you take the amount of time that those players had played together into account and try to give an appreciable amount of time for mourning to the amount of time they're with. So if you kill a first level character, you don't necessarily spend a whole bunch of time eulogizing.
Sure.
But you kill a 10th level character that you've played together for all 10 levels, and you give the party a whole session to mourn, where they might be spending that session doing all kinds of non-comedy, non-quest related things just for or alternatively, they spend that time going out and avenging that character, because the players love that too. So if the character died and the other ones ran away is the only reason they didn't die, now they're that much more motivated to come back and beat him to the ground because they killed so-and-so, and we loved
it all adds to the overarching story that you've crafted as well.
Right, and you add it into your story, and you make it a poignant moment, just like in your favorite novels. I mean, who does this better than George R.R. Martin? He kills characters left and right in the Game of Thrones series.
Sure.
Of authors that like to kill main characters off, he's probably got one of the highest kill counts.
He's up there.
Yeah, he's up there. But he took to reflect on those deaths, and he makes those moments, and he refers back to them, like the Red Wedding, and those sequences, they get referred back to all through the rest of the series because they were important elements of the game. But you can only have those important elements if you throw them in there. If you don't avoid those challenges. And that segues into my next point in the art of it over being a science is some encounters are not meant to be beaten in combat. I touched on this before. Sometimes you're going to talk your way around an encounter. Sometimes you're going to find a shortcut that avoids an encounter. Sometimes you're going to run away and then find a shortcut that avoids trying to do that encounter again. Or you're going to run away and grind and come back against the encounter when you are better able to. One of the things you can do as a DM when you're not trying to railroad people in a game, but you don't want them to go one direction for a little while, is you can put a challenge in that direction that's above their level. And you put enough warning signs that it's above their level that maybe they'll avoid going that way until they're high enough level to do it, and by then you're ready to do it. And it could just be a section of the game you haven't detailed yet, so you just put a guard there just to give you time to get to detailing that section. That little DM cheat that I recommend. And it could be something, it doesn't even have to be combat related. You could put a locking mechanism that's DC to beat it with open locks checks is too high for any of the characters to make at their current level. And they'll try it, and they'll try assisting each other to get advantage and stuff, and they just can't get through it. Eventually, they'll give up and go another direction. But you've put a little stopgap there they did that in a lot of older modules, especially, like I said, Gygax, the guy who made this all, him and Arnson, when they wrote adventures, they didn't care about balance so much and stuff, but they did take into account that there were some areas of their dungeon that the module target levels would have been blown out of the water with.
Sure.
And so they would lock those areas with a lock that it was too hard to beat. They would lock those areas with a monster that you should run away from instead of going through, because it was going to get even harder further down the line on that row. Once you could beat that monster at the gate, you're high enough level to beat the other monsters past the gate. And that's how they locked off certain areas of certain dungeons. And that goes back to, like I said, pre-challenge rating. Because challenge ratings didn't come into effect until, like I said, 3rd edition. OD&D, Basic, Advanced, 2nd edition, none of those had a challenge rating system. The closest they had was you could loosely base your monster's difficulty by comparing their hit dice to the level of the party. So that was a kind of a jury-rigged challenge rating system, but there was no formalized challenge rating system. They didn't even have the assumption system. It was very loose, and it didn't necessarily make for these even balanced encounters that everybody's come to expect now, but it also didn't make for the large number of players that play with the purely by the book people that think that this is all about balance now, that think they can never run away because the DM will never send something at them that will kill them or will never make an unfair fight. A boss battle should be an unfair fight. The boss should be somebody so tough that you may not make it. That's what makes it a boss.
Yeah, it's all in the name.
Yeah, you don't go up against Bowser in the first scene of Mario. You see Bowser, he runs away, and you fight all of his kids. Then you hit Bowser, but you don't hit Bowser at the big. That's not how it works. That segues into the next part, which is parties should know it's okay to run away from a losing battle. And I've touched on this before. You can telegraph that it's going to be a battle they might want to run away from, but they should know there's no shame in running away. I tell them in session 0 of my games that I run a deadly game, that you can run away. I tell my party, in fact, in my game, that I don't act like a bouncer at the bar with a clicker when you go in. So I'm not adjusting my combats because 3 people didn't show up for a session. They're still going up against the same combat that I had planned. So they might have to run away because 3 people didn't show up. Or like their healer didn't show up. Healer don't show up, might not want to do that combat.
Yeah, probably for the best for self-sustainability.
Right. And it makes it more believable because the dungeon doesn't have, in a real life dungeon experience, there would not be some goblin at the gate going with a clicker. Okay, 3 people entered. Only bring out troops 1 and 2.
Sure.
No, they're going to be like, kill them. and they're going to bring in more reinforcements when they can. But I don't do that. And so you do have to telegraph to your party and let them know that a losing battle, there's no shame in running away. Now, there are some loggerheads to that, like, for instance, paladins are the one character class that hate to run away. So there's a paladin in your group, and a lot of it is in their nature because they're the honor-bound holy knights that have to fight for the little guy even to their own death. And not all paladins are like that, but that's still the original basic paladin was a lawful good character. Now they can be any alignment and everything, but it's still, they still have an oath that they put on, and a lot of their oaths include things like not running from combat. So a lot of times you're going to find that in those runaway encounters, if a person's playing a paladin well, that's going to be your one kill or capture in the game. And you can turn that one into a capture sometimes, but you don't want to overuse that trope either, because if you always turn every kill into a capture, again, they start to feel like they can never die. But the paladin is built, one of the things a paladin is actually built for, and people forget that, to die defending the whole party. They're the character that's meant to go out that way. If they're going to die, they don't want to die of old age in their bed. They want to die having taken a hit for a companion or an innocent.
Die with some honor.
Yeah, that's the mantra for a paladin. That's kind of what the paladins are. I mean, and there are other flavors of paladins. Like I said, there's the Oathbreaker, which breaks a lot of that because they don't care about oaths. But that's really an anti-paladin, even though it's in the paladin ballywhack. That's why it's also a DMG class and not in any of the regular books, because it's an optional class and not every DM allows. And that's the other thing, is when you're building your characters, because you asked me earlier how to handle those power gamers and stuff. A lot of times DMs do that by only allowing certain source book material. Might have a game that doesn't, if I don't want to have that paladin moment too much in my game, this is my least favorite class in the whole game, because of it gets misplayed a lot, and its original concept was doing double duty with the cleric. So they really was just making the cleric and the paladin on the same archetype from history, because the cleric is based on a warrior priest, not a trying to think of the non-combat priest, but they're based on warrior priests. The biggest difference is instead of swords, because they didn't use cutting weapons in the original books, but the paladin was it was also based on the exact same priest. They were both based on the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, the Knights of Charlemagne. These were the ones that were the basis for the cleric and the paladin class. So there was using two classes to do the same archetype. My personal opinion was throw the paladin out and just play with the cleric and build him the way you want it to be, that paladin if you needed it to be. But if you wanted to keep that paladin moment of not running away and dying while the party lives, if you didn't want that moment to happen all the time, or you just didn't want to deal with some of the paladin abilities, you could say no paladins are allowed in your game. That's the thing with you, unless you're in a league setting, an organized play setting, you as the DM have the right to disallow any material, even if it's in the basic player handbook like the paladin is. Most likely you allow all, but you disallow things like Volo's Guide, which lets you play monstrous races, or you disallow Xanathar's Guide because it has a whole bunch of alternate subspecialties, subclasses, and you don't know necessarily how those subclass powers are going to interact for the power build. In 3rd edition, I disallowed almost every book but the player handbook, because they could be coming from any source. Even the D&D written ones, I didn't allow all of them, because there was just too many combinations for me to try to make sure I could counter all the broken builds.
Sure.
And I think that a person could put plenty of personality and individuality into a character with just the material given in the player handbook. I mean, we played for years in 1st edition with just player handbook material, and no two characters were alike. You can get more differentiation of your characters out of role playing than you will just about juggling the numbers and different abilities. So that's the thing. So you can do that. And then finally, to get back on topic, because I segue a lot.
Yeah, my bad.
I do it too. I do it a lot. Remember the rule of cool. If it sounds like it will be fun for the players, try it out. That means if a player wants to do something that's not in the book specifically, but it doesn't steal from another player's uniqueness, is my general rule, then you can give them a chance to do it. And you can build an on-the-spot ruling for that. Like if they want to do the classic Errol Flynn, jump up, grab the chandelier, swing over, drop behind the guy, swing around and behead him kind of attack, you can make a spot ruling for that. But you don't let them necessarily crib on somebody else's specialty. So, like for instance, if you take the dual wielding ability, you're able to hold 2 weapons and attack with both weapons in combat using your bonus action to attack with your offhand. But the monk is a specialist in unarmed attacks and can just do that with their unarmed attack. So since the offhand weapon does not count as a melee weapon by the rules of the dual wield, I don't let a dual wielder attack with an unarmed strike because that's the monk's specialty and I don't want to take it away from the monk.
Sure, it's kind of the specialization of that one class if you take that away.
Right.
A normal person.
I don't want to overshadow that. There's an optional rule called flanking that gave bonuses if you and an ally are directly across from an enemy. You could give a bonus, which is usually advantage, when attacking that enemy. But the rogue has an ability that says if an ally is adjacent to an enemy, they get advantage. And that's the rogue specialty. I don't want to diffuse the rogue specialty by using that alternate rule because it takes away from the rogue. It also takes away from certain monsters that have abilities like pack tactics that do some of the same things. I don't want to take away from those abilities to give it to everybody, so I don't choose to use that optional rule. Some DMs do choose to use that optional rule. Some DMs choose to modify that rule a little bit. Instead of giving advantage, they might give a +2 to that, and where the rogue would get their advantage for their ability, and then if they're also directly across, get the +2 on top of it. Then it wouldn't take away from the rogue. The rogue would be benefiting from it too. And the monsters could benefit from it too with their pack tactics. Some people do it that way, but the general basis of 5th edition is not to have a whole bunch of random pluses in the mix, which is why they brought in the advantage disadvantage system. So you got to be real careful when you start changing things into more random pluses, because it kind of breaks the system. But all of these together, these different things that I just outlined, the fit your encounters to your scenario, take into account your party composition and style of play. Do not set out to kill the party, but make sure that there are situations in which the PCs might die. Make sure that they know some encounters are not meant to be beaten in combat. There are other ways to beat an encounter. Parties should not know or should know it's okay to run away from a losing battle. And remember the rule of cool. If you bring all those together, you're now in the art of encounter building, not just the science of it. This is the part that differentiates a computer-based drawing from Michelangelo. A computer can draw with exacting detail and perfectly duplicate a picture technically, but Michelangelo will put that something extra in there because he's an artist. And this is those things that will help you move towards the art of being a DM over just the science of doing it. And now I've talked about difficulties. I've said easy, medium, hard, but I've not told you kind of what my concept is of it. This goes back to some older Dungeon Master's guides from 3rd and 4th edition, slightly modified. But the breakdown is about what I like to do for total encounters for my game. 5% of encounters I think should be easy. By easy, I mean it uses few, if any, resources, often less than 10%. What was that?
Only 5%?
Yeah, about 5. So 1 in 20 encounters overall should be of those really easy variety. And that's not counting the ones that aren't meant to take any resources at all. They're just filler to fill time. This is the ones that you are putting in as encounters, like it's a single. This is more like an easy combat encounter where you might send a single sentry to be defeated. You're not going to have to use up any resources to do it. But it's an encounter in that respect, not the other encounters like interaction encounters. Those easy ones of those can happen all the time. But only 5% of the real resource type encounters should be of the easy variety. 50% of your encounters, so a good half, so 10 out of 20, should be those medium level, or what they used to call equal level encounters. And an equal level encounter really only uses about 20% or so of resources. You'd think that it would use more, but it really doesn't, because like I said, you're given many more resources than you're expected to use in a single encounter. You're given a lot of them and you're supposed to choose from them, but about 20, so 1 in 5 of your abilities should probably be used up, whether it's, having to heal that much, having to use 2 out of your 10 spell slots, or 1 of your higher level spell slots, but you use up about 20% of your resources to get through a medium encounter, and half of your encounters should be that. So the bulk of your encounters. Then there's a special category, which is your hard encounters. There's 30% of your encounters I think should be hard. So that's 6 out of 20, but I break that down into 2 categories. They're going to use up about 50% of your resources, first of all. About half to 3/4 of your resources will be used in these hard encounters. But half of these encounters are just hard, just that. The other half, about 3 out of 30, are tricky encounters, which means they might be harder than hard normally, but some part of the environment or some item that they could pick up earlier before taking on the encounter, or some specific abilities that the characters have that they don't always use, might make them easier. Might actually even drop them down from hard to being more like a medium or even easy encounter if done right. But those all count as hard because they're hard until you find out whatever that secret is. It could be you're fighting lycanthropes, werewolves, until the party characters realize that it takes silver or magic to attack them. They might waste 2 or 3 rounds attacking it with regular mundane weapons that ain't doing any damage. Mm-hmm. But then they realize, oh wait, these take silver coated weapons or magic to kill. Okay, all our magic users need to start attacking, and anybody have any silver weapons, or we need to go get silver weapons for any future encounters like this. So, or there's a monster that the killing stroke can only be done by this one particular sword, and they may have left that sword behind, or it might be on the one character that didn't show up today. So they know they have to exit out of this encounter until they get that one item and then come back, because until then it's a deadly or impossible encounter because they can't kill him. And then 5% of your encounters are your deadly encounters. Those are your boss and mini boss battles. They use up 100% or more of your resources. And by or more, I mean they use up more resources than you have, so you better be running away. These are your bosses. You want that boss encounter, but you don't need 50 boss encounters. 1 boss encounter per 20 is about right. This is the one where you go up against Strahd, the great king vampire. This is the one where you go up against Imhotep, the mummy. These are the encounters where you take on Smog, the dragon. These are the set piece encounters where the environment is involved. The whole thing is involved in taking on that battle. And these are just the basic, this is the breakdown I use. I use it on a 5% basis because a lot of things in D&D translate to that 5% basis because it's based around the D20. A 1 in 20 is 5%. Yeah. So it's easier for people to do it. You could even set it up as a rolled kind of thing if you really wanted to, for kind of randomly generating your encounters. And when you roll that natural 20, you're going up against a boss encounter. And that's just kind of how I like to break it down. And I wanted to go into a little detail about that, but I don't want to spend too much time about that. But is there any questions on that?
I had a personal question.
Sure.
Is the difficulty of the encounter does that directly correlate to kind of the likelihood of mortality, or does that vary on a bunch more factors?
The difficulty of an encounter does not directly translate to the likelihood of mortality, because I've seen characters die in an easy encounter. The likelihood is part of it, but it's more in D&D terms. The difficulty of encounter is really based on the resource usage expected from that encounter. Now, encounters can break the resource usage and they can kill your character, which is the ultimate loss of resources.
Sure.
You lose one character in your party, and your party is down whatever percentage based on the number of characters you have. So if you have a 5-man party and you lose one party member, you're down permanently 20% of your resources overall for the whole party, because that you lost one character. You lose 2 characters, that's 40. Now, if you have 10 players, it's only 10% of your resources, or 20 for 2 of them, you know. But the difficulty of the encounter in my outlook is based on how many resources that encounter uses, which is why I can apply this to non-combat encounters. It can still be a difficult encounter if you're expected to use a lot of resources to get past it, like a puzzle room where you have to solve all these puzzles, and that puzzle is going to require several spell usages to get through, and it's going to be required. There's not very many workarounds for it. The characters could get real clever and come up with a workaround I didn't think of, but they're, for the most part, going to have to use 6 or 7 spells maybe. I could say that that's a hard or deadly encounter or boss level encounter because of how many resources I'm expecting them to use in the encounter. So anything there where they're going to use up about 75 or more % of their resources, in my mind, is going to be in the deadly or boss category of encounters, even if death is not what's on the table.
Okay, all right. I did have another question for you. How, and this goes a bit beyond the actual core game D&D. I just had a personal question for you specifically, Doc. I mean,
Sure.
In a world that we live in where you would be dead long before you ingested all of the entertainment products that we have like available to us, why D&D? Why do you keep going to D&D every time? I mean, obviously, you know, I'm sure you play other things as well, but, you know, D&D seems to be kind of your bread and butter. So I was just curious, what about it you're so devoted to?
D&D is my passion. I credit D&D with a lot of things. First off, I encountered it at a very young age. I haven't told this story. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because we don't have too much time left, and I want to get some more questions in possibly. But I started playing D&D on my 7th birthday. My mom and my stepfather had bought the D&D games several months before, and I kept wanting to play with them. And they wouldn't let me play with them because they were trying and stuff. And I told them I wanted it. I want one, and give me one and stuff. And they decided the game wasn't for them, so they put it away and surprised me with it on my 7th birthday. And I was excited. Oh, I loved the look of the pictures on the book. It was just a white book with black and white line drawings at the time. It was one of I mean, there was better versions of the book out there by the time I got it, because I got it in '78 and the basic book was already out. But I started with the OD&D book, the very first pamphlets that Gygax and Arnson came out with. But I was entranced. You know, I'd already loved Lord of the Rings. My mom used to read it to me. Lord of the Rings and Tom Sawyer were my 2 favorite books to be, well, specifically The Hobbit and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn were my 2 favorite books at the time. And my mom would read them to me. And so the whole idea of an adventure quest entranced me as a child. I loved magic and I loved exploration. You know, I was an Eagle Scout, Boy Scouts, loved to do all that later on in life. But D&D influenced my life there in a huge manner. It increased my vocabulary. It helped with my math skills, my reading comprehension. A lot of people don't know, who don't talk to me for very long, don't realize I tested into Mensa when I was 11 years old. And I attribute a lot of that to D&D. I have a 185 IQ, which is higher than Einstein's.
Yeah.
So, I've got one of the highest IQs I know. I'm used to being the smartest person in the room. I had a bad case of boy wonder syndrome because I used to do everything before the adults could do it. And that's why I was really good at D&D too. But I think D&D also, having it encountered that early in my life, helped expand my intelligence quotient. It helped me learn, because D&D teaches you problem solving. It teaches you how to work together as a team. It teaches you how to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, which is something a lot of people lack, that empathy to put yourself in another person's position. But in D&D, you're doing that all the time. When you're putting yourself in your character's shoes, you're playing a role that's not you. And so I was entranced by all of that, and I played voraciously. And I've played almost every role-playing game that ever came out up until, recently. I mean, I couldn't keep up with all of them nowadays.
Sure.
In the 80s and 90s, I played everything. I played Call of Cthulhu, I played World of Darkness, Rifts, Shadowrun. You couldn't name a role-playing game that I didn't at least try. I played Talislanta. I played Middle-earth role-playing, Rollmasters, Stormbringer, Hawkmoon. I played everything. And I DM'd several of them. I mean, I DM'd D&D. The first thing I ever did with D&D was DM a session for my friends that afternoon. And it was probably the worst session I ever DM'd. I'm betting a 7-year-old child trying to do it from the books. I think I randomly monster section and picked a monster and just send my people against it. Not to mention it took, a couple hours to make everybody's characters. And that was when characters were very simple, but I got, 4 of my buddies together, and we played our first adventure, and I was hooked from that moment. D&D to me was from catnip to a cat. It was my perfect yin to my yang.
Sure.
I loved it.
We just got 2 fan comments come in, or
Sure.
questions. Allie Parmenter wanted to know, what's your favorite moment as a DM player that you've had?
As a DM or as a player?
She said both.
Okay. My favorite moment as a DM is when I get that introverted, shy person that joins my table who gets so caught up in the game that they either see and whoop with joy or shout with shock at what just happened. And these are the ones that are the wallflowers. They don't want to interact with nobody. They're spectators mostly in the game. And when I can draw that person in as a DM, that's my moment as a DM. My favorite moment as a player, I've got a bad case of boy wonder syndrome, like I told you. And I have a tendency to play bards, I think I've also mentioned.
You did, yeah.
As one of my favorite classes, because I am in real life kind of a bard. It's one of the few classes that I play that's really a reflection of me. And when I do something like in the middle of a game, I write out like a 12 to 15 line poem about the situation that just happened and hand it to the DM. And in this case, the DM was Bart. He's one of our store DMs. He runs our 101 tables. And there was later on, you had to touch a stone and see if you got accepted to be part of this society, this secret, well, not secret, but this organization that lets some people could be affiliated, but couldn't be members unless the stone accepted them. But because my poem had been written about the society and its goals and stuff, the DM Bart hand waved it. I didn't even have, I mean, we did the touching of the stone, but the guy running the ceremony went up and touched the stone with me to almost ensure that I got it, because basically it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to get it because I earned it by the poem, because I played that character and showed people that you could do something out of combat that could be as impressive as anything in combat. Because I like to show people that there is more to the game than just hacking slash killing monsters all the time. It is one of the 33% of the game, one of the pillars, but it is about, in practice, it's about 75% of the actual game, because when you're building modules, especially for beginners, you build them towards the more action-y involved part of the game, and you want to bring new players in and get them interested. Combat's what gets them interested, because it's the most gamey part, it's the most mechanical, and two, it's the most action. They feel the most actual agency in combat. They actually see or kill the bad guy, and that's the carrot to draw people into the game. Then later on, you appeal to their other creative parts of the game. Now there's those other rare gems out there, people I love. Allie actually happens to be one of them that loves the actual play of the game, not just combat. She loves the story, and she builds her characters with more involved than just metagaming and power building. Allie I've played with, we played in Colby's table at Metagames for a while, including some Dungeons of the Mad Mage and some Salt Marsh, and she's a wonderful player to play with. I'm glad to see you're here. But those are those rare gems that come there initially, not for the combat, but for the game as a whole. But a lot of the people that are just joining the game, especially the young kids, are fascinated with combat. So that's 75% of all the early modules are focused on combat, because you want to keep them interested in it before you draw them into the thespian part of it and the exploration part of it, the puzzle solving. That comes later. And as you go up in tiers of the game, you'll actually find more constructed modules will start to have more focus on the other two pillars, because one, it becomes harder to challenge people in combat because of the misrepresentation of the challenge rating system and everything. It becomes much harder, and it's more and more of a science to do it in combat. But you can always challenge them with interactions, and you can always challenge them with puzzles that keep up with their level growth. And so, you know, that's my moment as a player, is when I got to showcase my personal ability outside of combat to be the character I was. And I mean, Bart calls me Ed Greenwood half the time now, because he thinks I'm Ed Greenwood in disguise. And for those who don't know, Ed Greenwood wrote The Forgotten Realms. So, or he thinks I'm the reincarnation of Gary Gygax.
One of the two.
One of the two. But
now we do have time for about one more fan question. And it's actually interesting that you brought up Colby, because he actually chimed in and wanted to know, when you're building an encounter, do you use reaction roll tables or just freeform the encounter each time?
By reaction roll tables, you mean make a table of how the monsters would react to different things? Or do you mean like the charisma-based reaction rolls from older editions?
Let us go under the assumption that he meant the first one.
Yeah. Well, no, I tend to just play my monsters as if they're my characters. So I react to, I mean, some of my notes will actually, when I'm building the encounter, my notes will have some specifics on how they'll react to certain situations that'll be coming up, because for one thing, if I'm building for players I know, I'll know some of the things they're going to do. So I'll kind of jot down quickly, okay, so yes, so uh, almost invariably. So if this happens, this is going to be their reaction. So I'll plan stuff like what attack actions that they'll use at what times during the combat based on what stimuli. So in that way, I'm building a reaction kind of matrix, not a table. If-then statements, flowcharts to do that. And then the other thing is, yeah, I play as my monsters. So I try to use the intelligence level of the monster and play accordingly. So if it's a mindless zombie, it's mostly going to attack in a mindless manner. If it's a clever evil necromancer, he's going to have evil dark plots, and he's going to go after like the spellcasters in the party because they're the biggest threat to him. He's going to stay in the back. He's going to use abilities himself, trying to manage his resources in different ways. But yeah, I don't build a reaction table or use any standardized reaction tables. I do use some charisma-based reactions in those non-combat encounters. I do take charisma into effect because it's great that a person can role play really well, and I love that. I love being able to put the dice away and do that. But I also have to remember that the player's charisma score is not necessarily the same as the character's charisma score. So the player might be a terrible role player, and that's not a criticism of the player. It's saying that it's just not his or her forte. They may not be good at talking to people, but their character might have an 18 in charisma. And if they really try to do a great role play of an encounter, even if they make a major like social faux pas in their role play of it, I might ignore that because their charisma is high enough that I know that the character wouldn't have done it. And so I do use the charisma-based reactions. And then, of course, the other kind of reactions in D&D, it's part of the action economy. When you're building encounters, you have a reaction every turn that you use. So if you meant that kind of reaction, that's usually not a table, but it's more of a specific action. And I know Colby knows better, so I figured that's probably not what he meant in this case. And that goes into the last thing I do want to get in here before we finish. We got like 6 minutes left, and we didn't quite get through. We talked about the 3 pillars of play, which was going to be my next thing. And I was going to talk about complex encounters, but I actually talked more about that in my building a boss monster or building better bosses video, which is up on the YouTube for Visioncon, so you don't have to get it here. And of course, a more complex version of this is also up on the Visioncon YouTube, so you can get more information by going and seeing both of those. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was action economy. When you're building your encounters, you do have to remember that because the challenge rating system is so inaccurate, you have to take into account the number of actions on both sides of the combat for when you're balancing your encounters. We're not worrying on it balance as much as trying to make them live up to what their difficulty is supposed to be. So, for instance, if you have 5 characters at first level, they have 5 actions, so they can take 5 attack actions. Really, generally indicate 1 attack. Some of them can get an extra attack with a bonus action, but we're not going to count that. That means that for a monster to be the equivalent of those 5 players, which is what the CR system is supposed to make them, they need to be able to keep up with at least 50% of those actions. So if you're sending just one single CR1 creature against those 5 party members, that CR1 creature needs to somehow be able to do half of 5 actions rounded up. if he's going by himself, half of 5 action round up is 3. The best way to do that is do things like creatures with multi-attack, like a claw bite. That way they're getting 3 attacks in to kind of counterbalance that. Or a monster with an aura that has an always on kind of thing. So if you get close, you take damage or take disadvantage or take on a status condition that balances out not having another action to do. Or they use area of effect powers like fireball or gaseous cloud or something of an appropriate level, but they can hit more than one character to balance out the fact that they only have one real main action. And if you don't have an ability like that, then you could give that monster a legendary action. If he's a solo monster that you're expecting to be of an equal or tougher encounter based on your characters, you could give them what's called a legendary action. That's anywhere from 1 to 3 actions that they take on another person's turn to help balance out the actions. And most monsters with legendary actions have them detailed in the monster stat block. But in this case, you would add it to the monster, and the basic action would be at the end of any other character's turn, they can take a free attack action like they could do during their normal turn, is one of the actions they can do. The other thing they could do is a recovery action where they could spend a hit dice or remove a status effect that's on them to shrug it off. And they can do that once. Or they could use a movement ability, things like that. So you do want to balance out your action economy so that the monsters have anywhere from half to just over the number of actions as the party has. And that's all the monsters total. So if you do a single monster versus the party, you got to remember that that single monster needs to be able to be competitive to that party of 4 or 5 or 12 characters. And that means they need more abilities to do that, or they need to be of higher level with stronger single abilities to do that. But you keep your action economy, because that's probably the most important aspect of encounter balancing in the game. And I did want to close with that. And normally I spend a lot more time on that part, but I didn't want to not touch on it. You can go to the YouTube channel for Visioncon, watch my full almost 2-hour video where I talk about this. I go on some segues there too, so it's going to be a similar experience.
We'll also post it on Facebook as well.
Yeah, it's posted on Facebook. It's in my, it's in your YouTube. It's on my YouTube channel as well. So if you go and you join my YouTube channel, you'll see that. And in addition to the 2 that I sent to share with Visioncon, I've got a few others out there right now, including a 2-parter on building engaging NPCs that I couldn't get solidified down before Visioncon. Every time I kept trying to do it, too many connection issues and stuff, and it ended up being 2 parts as it is because of a connection right in the middle. But it's there for people who went to that previous panel. So definitely check those things out. Come to Metagames in Springfield if you're local, and check out, get with Colby, get with Bart, get with me, get with Megan or Matt, any of the store DMs. We will help you get into D&D. We will help you even become a dungeon master. We will do some workshops, and we're planning some workshops in the future. So I want to push that. And come to Game, sister convention to Visioncon. We've always been very good friends with Visioncon. I'm part of the board there, and I run the RPG College as its own unique table at Game. And so please come to Game as well. Don't know if we're going to have Game this year or not, with everything that's going on. We're currently scheduled in August. I don't know if we're going to be recovered enough in August to have a live convention. That's still a lot of people together. We might try something virtual. We haven't talked about it yet. But if you can, or like I said, just approach me, email me at gamersus@aol.com, or message me here on Facebook probably want to send me a friend's request first so it doesn't go into my spam folder. I'm always happy to help players and DMs. And I'm actually looking for suggestions for future panel topics. I tried to post something on Visioncon's thing last night about looking for advice, but I think they have a post review process set up, so it didn't post yet. But yeah, let me know. I'm always free, and most of the DMs at Metagames, pretty much all the DMs at Metagames are pretty good about that too. They're going to talk to you. They'll help you in any way they can to help build the hobby and introduce people to the wonders of D&D that I was lucky enough to get into at such an early age. I do want to thank you, everybody. We've gone over by about 2 minutes. I do apologize for that. The next person's probably chomping at the bit to come in, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off real quick if everybody's done with me.
Well, let me stop the record real quick.